It was 2:17 in the morning when I finally admitted I'd been here before. Same desk, same cold coffee in the mug my sister gave me 3 Christmases ago. Same manuscript open on my laptop, cursor blinking at the end of chapter 4 exactly where it had blinked 8 months earlier. The lamp beside me threw a weak yellow circle across the pages, barely enough to read by. Nothing like the clarity I used to feel when an idea caught fire. I used to work in brightness. Now I worked in dim persistence, and I couldn't remember when the switch had happened. This was the 3rd year running I'd sat in this exact spot, promising myself this would be the year I finished. The year I stopped starting over. The year the talent everyone said I had would finally show up on a page someone else could read. But Brilliance Trapped looks a lot like no brilliance at all, and I was tired of the performance. Tired of the motion. Tired of mistaking hours at the desk for progress. I closed the laptop and sat back. The question arrived quiet, almost polite. What if the problem isn't talent? What if it's the habits I've been calling productivity? By morning, the question had sharpened into inventory. I opened a blank document and started listing them. Not dreams, but almost. The promotion at 29 I'd turned down because I didn't feel ready, even though the job description could have been written from my performance reviews. The peer who'd launched the exact community platform I'd sketched out 2 years earlier, while mine stayed buried in a folder labeled Someday. The meeting where I'd had the answer but waited too long to speak, and watched someone else say it less elegantly to applause. A decade of motion, a decade of effort. But when I traced the gap between effort and outcome, the pattern was surgical. I have been busy. I had been disciplined. I had been everything except effective. I wasn't failing for lack of ability. I was failing because 10 specific habits had woven themselves so tightly into my routine I'd started calling them character. The people-pleasing I'd named generosity. The perfectionism I'd labeled excellence. The paralysis I'd dressed up as thoroughness. They weren't personality traits. They were a cage I'd mistaken for shelter, and the light I used to work by had been dimmed one compromise at a time. I stared at the list. 10 patterns. 10 years. Somewhere in there was the silent killer, the one habit all the others had grown around, like rot beneath good paint. I pulled up the old emails to make it real. The first was dated April 2019, subject line, Leadership Opportunity. They'd wanted me to run the new division. 32 direct reports, budget authority, equity. I declined in 3 polite paragraphs, citing timing and readiness, when the truth was simpler. I didn't believe I deserved it. That was habit #3, imposter syndrome dressed up as humility. My colleague took the role instead. 5 years later, the salary gap between us sat at $47,000. I'd done the math. Then there was the patent application, still saved in a folder, time-stamped June 2020. I'd had the concept of cleaning a micro-sensor array for soil hydration, but I'd waited for one more dataset, one more validation study, one more peer review before filing. Habit #7, analysis paralysis, wearing the mask of rigor. Someone else filed 8 months later. Their version is in commercial production now. And then there was the relationship. The one where I'd molded myself so carefully to his needs that by the end, I couldn't remember what I actually wanted for dinner, let alone from life. Habit #8, chronic people-pleasing. I'd called it love. He'd called it convenient. I used to be boundless. At 23, ideas came fast and I acted faster. Now, at 34, I was only bound by caution, by patterns, by the growing suspicion that brilliance has an expiration date if you cage it long enough. I wasn't interested in affirmations or vision boards. I was interested in surgery. 10 habits, 10 weeks, tracked like the experiment I should have run years ago. This wasn't about becoming a better version of myself. It was about removing the debris, blocking the version that already existed. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and built the framework. Each habit got its own row, the pattern, the replacement protocol, and a receipts column. Habit #8, people-pleasing, would be replaced with boundary setting tracked via screenshots of every no I sent without apology or explanation. Habit #7, analysis paralysis, would get a 72-hour decision rule logged by voice memo the moment I made the call, not when it felt safe. I wasn't adding disciplines. I was removing the film over the lens. The structure mattered. Vague aspiration dies in comfort. Behavioral architecture survives contact with a Tuesday. So, I built the scaffolding. Calendar blocks color-coded, by habit. A journal template for daily check-ins. A single notebook where I'd tape in every piece of evidence that I'd done the thing I said I'd do. If you've ever felt one idea away from breakthrough but can't figure out why you stall, drop a comment. I think you'll recognize yourself in number 6. I labeled the folder Receipts, Week 1, and set the start date for Monday. What came next wasn't transformation. It was documentation. Week 1 started with a text I'd normally have agonized over for 20 minutes. A former colleague asked me to review her grant proposal, due in 4 days. Old me would have said yes and lost a weekend. New me typed 6 words. I can't take that on. No apology. No counteroffer. I screenshotted it before I could soften it, then filed it under habit hash-on. The sky didn't fall. Habit hash 2 was multitasking, the lie I'd been telling myself about efficiency. I color-blocked my calendar into 90-minute single-task sessions and turned off every notification that wasn't a human emergency. Tuesday morning, 8 to 9:30. Manuscript only. No email. No research rabbit holes. No podcast in the background. I finished Chapter 5. The first complete chapter I'd written in 4 months. Comparison scrolling went next. I set app limits 20 minutes total daily across all social platforms and reclaimed my mornings. 90 minutes back, just like that. I used them to write instead of watching someone else's highlight reel. Habit hash 4, Perfectionism, broke on a Thursday. I had a draft proposal for a consulting client. It wasn't perfect. It was done. I sent it. 6 hours later, the reply came, "Where has this voice been? Let's move forward." First external validation in 18 months, and it hadn't required polish, just presence. By Friday, I filed a project proposal I'd been sitting on for 9 months, waiting for someone to greenlight it. Habit hash 5, waiting for permission. I gave it to myself instead. These weren't transformations. They were small, specific, measurable wins. But reactive chaos had started to look like proactive control, and the difference was just a handful of different choices, tracked and received, 1 week at a time. The second 5 went deeper into territory I'd been avoiding because it meant admitting how far I'd drifted. Habit hash 6 was overconsumption. I'd been inhaling content like it was productivity, podcasts, articles, courses, newsletters. My input to output ratio was 10 to 1. I flipped it. For every hour I consumed, I produced 2. The content detox felt like withdrawal for 3 days, then it felt like oxygen. Habit hash 7 was the one I'd been circling. Analysis, paralysis. The endless research, the just one more data point stall. I set a 72-hour decision rule. If I had enough information to make a reasonable call within 3 days, I made it and logged it by voice memo. No extensions. Week 6. I launched the pilot program I'd been almost ready to start for 14 months. It wasn't perfect. It ran. Habit hash height broke in a conference room. I'd spent years playing small, nodding along, drafting smart observations I never voiced. In a strategy meeting, I spoke up, clean, clear, 30 seconds. They adopted the idea by the end of day, not because I'd waited for the perfect moment, but because I'd stopped waiting. Habit hash 9 was the hardest to name. I'd been conflating busyness with worth. I was on 5 committees, none of them mission critical. I cut 3. 11 hours back per week. The guilt lasted 4 days. The clarity lasted. Habit hash 0 was the body I'd been running into the ground. I made sleep and movement non-negotiable, same as client deadlines. Within 2 weeks, my cognition sharpened measurably. The fog I'd been writing through wasn't creative. It was exhaustion. By week 10, I opened my journal and read the side-by-side entries. Week 1, tired, stuck, same wall. Week 10, I feel the hum again. That hum, the bright, clean energy I'd had at 23. It wasn't gone. It had just been buried under noise. I slipped twice, once back into people-pleasing, once into paralysis, but I course-corrected within a day each time. This wasn't linear, but the pattern was suddenly clear. Habit hash 7, analysis paralysis, had been the silent killer. Every other habit had grown in its shadow, excuses dressed as rigor. The moment I started deciding, everything else began to move. The light wasn't something I needed to find. It was something I'd stopped blocking. The pushback started in week 7, right when the momentum felt sustainable. An old colleague sent a tersy email. "You've changed. Not sure I recognize you anymore." I declined to co-chair her initiative, something I would have said yes to automatically 6 months earlier. She'd mistaken my boundary for arrogance. I read it 3 times, then filed it without reply. External approval versus internal alignment. I knew which one paid rent. my mother called that same week. I'd said no to hosting Thanksgiving, something I'd done by default for 5 years running, usually while buried in deadlines I'd then miss. "I just think it's unlike you to put yourself first," she said, and the words landed exactly as intended. The inner voice arrived on cue. "Who do you think you are?" "I think I'm someone who stops breaking promises to herself." I didn't say, but I thought it. A friendship cooled. Someone I'd been over-functioning for covering her shifts, editing her presentations, absorbing her chaos pulled back when I stopped. The text was polite but final. "I feel like we're in different places now." We were. I'd left the place where my worth was measured by how useful I could be. Then stress hit, and habit hasson crept back in. A client asked for a same-day turnaround on a scope I hadn't agreed to. I said yes before I thought. Spent the weekend on it. Realized Monday morning I'd backslid a full week. I recalibrated, sent an invoice for the extra hours, reset the boundary in writing. It wasn't clean, but it was correction. The light flickered. It didn't go out. Resilience, I was learning, wasn't avoiding the slip, it was catching it faster each time. Growth is lonely before it's liberating. I was still in the lonely part, but I could feel the edge of the other side. The email arrived in week 11, subject line almost identical to the one from 2019. Leadership role, Regional Innovation Director. Same company, same hiring manager. Different me. This time, I didn't spend 3 days drafting reasons I wasn't ready. I replied in 2 lines, attached my resume, and scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday. I walked in with a portfolio I couldn't have assembled 3 months earlier. The finished manuscript, now with an agent. The pilot program, Live and Scaling. A recorded keynote I'd pitched myself for and delivered to 200 people, not hypotheticals. Proof. The interview was a contrast showcase. 5 years ago, I'd apologized for my ideas before I'd finished explaining them, hedged every assertion with, "I think," and "maybe," and "I could be wrong." This time, I owned the room. When they asked about my approach to cross-functional leadership, I didn't guess. I walked them through what I'd already built. When they asked about risk tolerance, I handed them the data from a decision I'd made in 72 hours that most people would have studied for 72 days. The hiring manager leaned back, same woman who'd offered me the role the first time. "What changed?" I stopped rehearsing and started performing. She smiled, nodded, didn't need me to say more. The offer letter came 4 days later. $68,000 higher than the salary I'd walked away from in 2019. I printed it, signed it in blue ink, scanned it back, and filed the original in the drawer next to my journal. The office they showed me during onboarding faced east. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Natural light all morning. I stood in it for a moment, feeling the warmth on my face, and thought about the dim lamp back at my desk. I didn't need better light. I just needed to stop standing in my own shadow. By month 4, the habits had stopped feeling like discipline and started feeling like infrastructure. My morning protocol was automatic now. 90 minutes of output before any input. No negotiation. Weekly invention time. 3 uninterrupted hours every Thursday for work. No one had asked me to do yet. Had become the space where my best ideas lived. I'd set quarterly audits in my calendar. 1 hour to review all 10 habits and check for drift. Boundaries weren't rebellion anymore. They were architecture. The outcomes were tangible, modest, and real. The manuscript sold in February, $15,000 advance, not life-changing money, but it was a check with my name on it for words I'd actually finished. The pilot program scaled to 3 regions. 2 speaking invitations came in from conferences I'd never had the portfolio to apply to before. And the friendship that had cooled? We met for coffee. I apologized for the whiplash, not for the boundary. She told me she'd been watching, trying some of it herself. We rebuilt on honest terms. I used to think genius was something you unlocked, a vault you finally cracked with the right combination of effort and timing. But standing in my new office, reviewing the last 4 months of receipts, I realized the truth was simpler and harder. The genius was already there. It had been suffocating under the performance of productivity, under motion I'd mistaken for progress, under habits I'd confused with identity. I wasn't waiting for the light anymore. I'd become its steady, sustained, my own source. Which of these 10 hit hardest for you? I'd love to know if you're trying this. Accountability is the underrated habit number 11. The work wasn't over, but the wall was gone. 6 months in, a junior colleague asked to meet for coffee. She had the look I recognized immediately, the exhaustion that comes from working hard in circles. She showed me her half-finished project, her list of almosts, her growing suspicion that something was wrong with her. I slid the laminated sheet across the table. The 10-habit map, printed and preserved after someone on my team asked for a copy. It's not you, I said. It's these. Contrast hung in the air between us. Inheritance of limitation versus inheritance of liberation. I could pass along the cage, tell her it's just how it is, that genius is rare, and she should be grateful for the scraps. Or I could hand her the key I'd cut myself. She left with the map and my number. I left with clarity about what came next. The consulting practice had launched quietly in month 5, 3 clients so far, all teaching the removal over addition framework. The second manuscript was underway, due in 8 months, and for the first time I believed I'd hit the deadline. Not because I'd found more hours, but because I'd stopped spending them on patterns that looked like work. That night, I stood in the same room where this started. Same desk, same lamp throwing its weak yellow circle, but I didn't need it brighter anymore. I turned it off and watched the dawn light come through the window, clean and sufficient. I'm not a genius who broke through. I'm someone who stopped blocking my own light, and that's the only breakthrough that ever mattered. The ceiling wasn't gone because I'd finally reached it. It was gone because I'd built the stairs.